Today's hearing will examine draft legislation that would impose secondary sanctions on foreign banks whose business supports the North Korean regime, whether directly or indirectly. By encompassing virtually all of North Korea's economic activity, these measures would represent the toughest financial sanctions yet directed at Pyongyang. This means going after coal, petroleum, textiles, and minerals, as well as North Korean laborers abroad. In addition, the bill would incentivize greater compliance with UN sanctions by leveraging our vote at the international financial institutions where certain countries with lax enforcement go to seek assistance. This bill puts those countries on notice. This proposed legislation has been informed by the committee's ongoing work on North Korea, as well as the UN panel of experts' evaluation of existing sanctions effectiveness. Needless to say, North Korea's sixth nuclear test on September 3rd, coupled with its repeated launching of intermediate and long-range ballistic missiles, underlines that more must be done. As a result, the legislative draft we'll be looking at lays out a choice. Foreign banks can either do business that benefits North Korea, or they can do business with the United States. They cannot do both. As many of us here today are aware, this is a similar approach to the one taken in 2010 against Iran, which helped compel the Ayatollahs to negotiate over their nuclear program. While there are differences of opinion over how successful those negotiations were, there is consensus, I believe, that in the absence of secondary sanctions affecting banks, Tehran would have been far less incentivized to even engage in talks. A focus on banks is especially important given how North Korea has evaded sanctions in the past. As Dr. John Park of Harvard's Kennedy School testified before this subcommittee in July, the North Koreans have moved much of their trading activity offshore using third country brokers and front companies. The specter of financial sanctions may concentrate the minds of foreign banks so that the entities identified by Dr. Park and others have fewer options to carry out transactions and mask North Korean involvement. Having said that, this bill would expand the scope of our sanctions to encompass even actors engaged in conventional trade with the North. Given North Korea's unchecked hostility, broadening our efforts in this way appears essential. Nevertheless, China's response to stronger sanctions has been cited as a concern, as the country accounts for an estimated 90% of North Korea's trade. Some have therefore argued that harsher sanctions now may damage cooperative efforts with Chinese leaders to curb North Korea's weapons program. But I would submit that those critics should be far more sensitive to a quarter century of failed multilateral efforts to rein in Pyongyang. There comes a time when caution, or, quote, strategic patience, as one administration phrased it, becomes a euphemism for self-delusion. As this subcommittee learned from its hearing in July, if China is not part of the solution to North Korea, it is part of the problem. Chinese officials have fallen short on enforcing UN sanctions that Beijing itself has signed on to. And as the UN Security Council talks following the North's sixth nuclear test have demonstrated, it is still unclear if China is committed to meaningfully tackling the North Korean threat. Finally, we should acknowledge that Kim Jong-un's eagerness in forcing the withdrawal of U.S. troops from the region may not be entirely inconsistent with Chinese interests. For all the breathless talk of China exerting influence around the globe as a rival to U.S. power, we are curiously asked to believe that its hands are tied when it comes to a small, economically dependent state next door. Well, if Chinese officials' hands are tied, then we should proceed with secondary sanctions so that their banks can assist international efforts to cut off North Korea's access to finance. If, on the other hand, China could do more than it has, then secondary sanctions may finally inspire it to do so. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing today, and I look forward to their testimony.